river to pray, study about that good old way, and who shall wear the robe and crown the Lord? Show me the way, show me the way, Lord, show me the way. Sorry, we have one more plan. But time flies, so.
Time does fly. Thank you so much, All right, now we will begin the recognition of those who are to be awarded for their poetry skills. With time in mind, as we announce the first, second, and third place winners for each class, if you could stand and be recognized, and your English teacher will give you your award. Thank you. And we'll begin with freshman English, and that's Ms. Ganaw and Ms. DeZita.
For third place of the freshman class at Convent High School, we have Isabella Ponte-Corvo. And for third place at Stuart Hall, Calvin Fox. For second place, we have Sophia Hettenpulver. And Leon Scott. And for first place in the freshman class, we have Isabel Panosian. And for the boys, Mitchell Maruyama.
For the sophomore class, Convent, third place, Isabella Panashi.
And for the boys, third place, Jackson Rose.
Second place, Sammy Lee.
And for the boys, Zeke Crawford.
For first place in the sophomore class, Corrine Sigmund.
And for the boys, Zach Hammer. For the junior class, girls, third place, Leanne Radcliffe. For the juniors, third place boys, Ty Ryan. Second place girls, Anna Lyons. Second place boys, Charlie O'Connell. First place girls, Madeline Ainsley. Third place boys, Will Hackle. Senior girls, third place, Natalie Helms. Seniors boys, third place, Elijah Tolentino. Girls, second place, Kelly Law. Second place boys, Thomas Egan. First place girls, Phoebe Flynn. poet judge this morning. Jovel Farolo is currently a senior at Stanford University, majoring in biology and minoring in education. Upon graduation, she will learn how to teach high school biology as a part of Stanford's teacher education program. While at Convent, Jovel resurrected the Left to Right literary magazine, swam on the swim team, wrote for the Broad View, sang Joyful Noise, and is a proud survivor of Cynthi's AP biology class. But her most formative experience at Convent was writing poetry with Mr. Charles Brady. Under his guidance, Jovel wrote constantly to cope with the emotional roller coaster of high school. Although Jovel has since taken a break from poetry writing, she is a firm believer in poetry as a form of political resistance, poetry as individual empowerment, and poetry as a source of healing. This gift of poetry gave Jovel the courage to be herself and to trust her voice. Welcome home, Jovel.
I still remember my first poetry class with Mr. Charles Brady. 3 other convent girls, Mr. Brady and I, sat around a table in the old center at 7:30 in the morning, maybe once a week. All of us except for Mr. Brady were usually still half asleep. Before we began to read our poems, Mr. Brady would say, "Once you give us that poem, it's no longer yours." The first time I heard these words, I stopped breathing. I had just poured my life onto this 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, spilled and tried to wipe a few drops of Ovaltine, and now I had to share my deepest, darkest secrets or an attempt to write something deep with 3 totally judging, totally intimidating girls and a published poet? Yes. But what I began to realize was that once you develop the courage to be vulnerable, you realize that your poem or your story becomes a part of everyone else's story, our story. For me, that tiny community of poets could contain no judgment because each of us agreed to share our stories and to reflect for a few quiet, sometimes sleepy moments before the school day on how we were interpreting and navigating our experiences. Last winter, I took a course on the evolution of speech and language. And what I learned was that human language is actually really highly evolved. And it's a highly adaptive trait that allows us to live in community. Poetry is an evolutionary birthright that connects us to the romance and to the violence and to the questions that have been passed down from generation to generation. Mr. Brady is also known to repeat another completely absurd declaration, which is, there is no such thing as a bad poem. I was certain that I had read some really bad poetry on Tumblr. But in reality, those words took some amount of courage, no matter how small, to be written and to be shared. So I thank all of you who submitted poems for your courage, and I encourage you to consider how mind-blowingly powerful your words can be. On to the winners. Of the top 4 boys' poems, the poem that hit me the hardest was one that critiqued almost every single system of oppression you could think of. Venture capitalism, sexism, racism, xenophobia, gun violence, the prison industrial complex, and classism, just to name a few. The poet did all of this through Disney princess metaphors, which made the juxtaposition of bone-chilling reality and fantasy even more jarring. And what impressed me the most was this poet's courage to write a poem that essentially, for a moment, shatters the barrier between our relatively protected lives and the darker realities that people in our city are living with. If the Disney princess metaphor didn't give it away, I'd like to congratulate Daniel M. on his poem, Get Up Story Tales, which you heard earlier this morning. You know, Stanford has a great spoken word team. The winning girls poem I had to read several times. In fact, as I read this poem over and over, I fell more and more in love with it. The poet personifies the concept of a human relationship as a string. The string defies time and distance to bring together two tangled souls. The poem itself, for me, was also tangled. Like a string, it had a clear beginning and a clear end, but in between it was all over the place in a beautiful and string-like way. The words were both overwhelming and subtle at the same time. The string metaphor grew more and more complicated throughout, but through it all, I could still detect something so familiar. The feeling of meeting someone who you will love deeply, but not knowing it at the moment of connection. Congratulations, Tess Collins, on his winning poem.